Amen. I want to start off with what may be a bold statement this morning. There is a significant push toward anonymity in our wider culture. Now, depending on where you're from, there will be varied perspectives about to what extent this is true. For instance, people from the South or from the Midwest will claim that folks are just friendlier in those regions. And everyone who's not from New York City will tell you that that is the worst place. People don't even look up to acknowledge the existence of other human beings as they walk by, let alone cars. But I would suggest that outside of our neighborhoods, and even sometimes within our neighborhoods, there is a strong leaning toward anonymity. We simply don't make the effort to connect with people in the midst of our busy lives, and that stands in stark contrast with the idealistic picture we tend to paint about life in the 1950s or 60s in our neighborhoods. That, in a significant way, is why the church is so important. In the broader culture these days, in most aspects of our lives, we live lives focused on what we are doing as individuals or as close-knit family groups. We're incredibly busy and have little time for the lives or needs of others. And as a result, much of our culture has lost its ability to really practice the art of building and maintaining community. And trust me, that is an art form. I think we see this happening around us as our culture becomes more and more divided. And we find ourselves feeling discouraged or even hopeless. The divisiveness of the rhetoric at the national level seeps down into levels below and can cause us to be overly suspicious of that which is not solely bound to us. And as a result, each person responds to this trend in their own way, perhaps seeking an escape, or worse yet, choosing to join into the dysfunction. Yet there is hope, for in the midst of this, the church can and should offer us a different option. Reaching all the way back to the earliest times of our faith tradition, we hear Paul's words. He too is speaking to a divided culture. And more specifically, he's speaking to a community within that culture that, despite their faith claims, is becoming more divided among themselves. So in the face of this trend, Paul reminds the people that as Christians, we are not to be conformed to this world. We are not to give in to the pressures and influences of the outside world. Instead, we are to seek to be transformed by our experience of the church, by our experience of the life of the church. So that in the face of growing division in the surrounding culture, we do not play into that divisiveness, but instead we come together around a common faith, around common values, seeking a sense of common purpose. We embody the alternative. We come together as a family of faith in which we seek to realize our commonly held ideal of community. We come together and we commit ourselves to that ideal. And into that community we bring our gifts, as Paul points out. And we are invited to share them as we see fit for the good of the community. Sometimes that means sharing because the Spirit moves us to do so, and other times we share in response to the request of others who see in us something worthwhile that we might offer. How many of us here have been approached by a certain minister or lay leader and asked to serve on a certain board or committee, or to offer our gifts to the life of the church in another way? That is how the church works, for without the sharing of our gifts, there is no life in the community. And in this community, one of the core values that we share is to care for one another. This gift of caring is something we all have the potential to offer in large and in small ways. And we do so not because we have to, but because it is who we are. It is central to our identity as Christians. When one among us is suffering, we realize that all of us in some way are suffering, but that need not be the last word. Instead, we recognize that in the face of that suffering, we all have a chance to respond, to meet the need, to offer some semblance of help and of hope. This, my friends, is a core value, a foundation of the church, of any family of faith. For the relationship we share is one of mutual care. And as part of this relationship, we are invited to bring our authentic selves, not just our gifts to offer care, but also our needs as well, as we make space for others to care for us. We are called to be vulnerable. Here at MBCC, we live this out in many ways, through our personal relationships, through fellowship groups like Shipmates and Mariners, Women's Fellowship, the new group, the Young Dads, and we live it out through our caring ministries, about which we will learn a bit more next Sunday as we commission our first group of caring ministers into their work. Yet no matter what place we occupy in the community, we are all invited, nay, called to care for one another in mutual love. And we can confound that sense of family, that experience of community, when we close ourselves off to being fully engaged. It may not surprise you, but generally speaking, the offering of care is not the problem. Where we often come up short is on our willingness to seek and receive care for ourselves. It is yet another influence of that wider culture that encourages us to be self-reliant. And it turns out that ministers tend to be the worst at living out this ideal. Not necessarily the offering care part, since that is often part of our sense of call to vocation and almost always part of our job description, but most definitely the receiving care part. And that can have an impact on the community. I knew a minister once who was a gifted pastoral caregiver. He liked nothing more than visiting his parishioners over coffee and offering a listening ear in their living room. He would spend hours of his work week in the hospital visiting people from his church, but also visiting anyone who needed a visit. At the same time, he was truly terrible when it came to receiving care and support from others. Few to no one in his congregation knew much of anything about his challenges or his struggles. For you see, as he saw it, he was the minister, and he was only ever to be the caregiver. Later in his career and life, he was diagnosed with 2 separate forms of cancer. And it was determined that treatment aimed at curing this cancer was not an option. Simply put, the cancer would ultimately lead to his death. And one of the forms was a particularly aggressive form. Well, given his background, it will not surprise you that he did his best to keep his diagnoses a secret from his congregation. He could not imagine having them care for him. Instead, he kept the news between himself and his 2 sons, neither of whom lived particularly close by. As time went on, his condition worsened, and he was unable to maintain his pastoral duties or his secret. Ultimately, he became primarily homebound until he finally moved into one of his sons' homes for the last 3 weeks of his life. During that decline, when he could no longer keep his secret, and the members of his congregation found out, his church family stepped up in an incredible way. For as soon as they found out that he was in need, they lined up to help out, to offer care for him as one of their own family members. And he finally realized what a gift that could be. And the congregation, well, they benefited and grew immensely by offering this care. As an aside, both my brother and I were incredibly moved by how my father's church cared for him in that season of his life. We cannot know the full and true impact of our sharing our gift of caring, my friends. We cannot know how someone will feel when they are struggling to come to terms with the diagnoses of significant medical and developmental challenges for their children, and they are pinned down by the financial burden associated with those challenges. And in response, their family of faith opens its arms to surround them with love and care and find ways to deliver financial assistance to help ease the burden. We cannot know what the true impact of our sharing our gift of caring, my friends. We cannot know how someone will feel when they are feeling isolated and alone in their later years, and they are simply unable to get out and be a part of all of which they had previously been a part. And in response, their family of faith finds ways to offer rides and coordinates visits, ensuring that they will be able to be a full participant in the life of the church, affirming for them that they are not forgotten. We cannot know what the true impact of our sharing our gift of caring is, my friends. We cannot know how someone will feel when they suddenly and unexpectedly lose their job and they face financial insecurity for themselves and their family, perhaps for the very first time. And in response, their family of faith rallies around them, offering encouragement, support, even possibly leads on new jobs, so they can again earn a living and take pride in the work that they are doing. We cannot know what the true impact of our sharing our gift of caring is, my friends. We cannot know how someone will feel when they are new to the community and are not sure where they might fit in or how they might engage. Perhaps they are feeling disconnected and besieged by self-doubt. And in response, their family of faith offers them a warm welcome and gives them a sense of home and a sense of purpose. We cannot know the true impact of our sharing our gift of caring, my friends. Living in a world that can far too often leave us feeling at best anonymous and at worst isolated and alone, we are called into community by God. We have been called to be a part of this community, this family of faith, and we are invited into one another's lives in a very special way. Offering the gift of God for the good of the community, we are transformed by the experience. We are transformed by the gift of caring that we share, both that given and received. Amen.